When I was a teenager, babysitting was my go-to gig. It was a way to earn some extra cash and get a taste of responsibility. Plus, I genuinely enjoyed spending time with kids. They have this raw, unfiltered way of seeing the world that I found refreshing. But one babysitting experience when I was 18 left me questioning everything I thought I knew about the line between reality and imagination. It was a gloomy Saturday in late October. The kind of day where the sky was an endless sheet of gray and the rain poured down in steady, relentless sheets. I was scheduled to babysit for a new family that evening, the Parkers. They lived in a charming old house on the edge of town, a place with a large wraparound porch and ivy creeping up the stone walls. The house had character, the kind of place you'd expect to find in a vintage postcard. When I arrived, I was greeted by Mrs. Parker, a warm and friendly woman in her late 30s. She introduced me to her son, Cody, a quiet but polite 6-year-old with a mop of brown hair and big, curious eyes.
Cody.
Nice to meet you, I said, crouching down to his level. He gave me a shy smile and clutched a toy car in his hand. Mrs. Parker walked me through the evening's plans. There's not much to it, she said with a smile. We've left some money for you to order a pizza. Cody's bedtime is at 8, and please, don't let him go into our bedroom. I nodded, taking mental notes. Got it. Anything else? She hesitated for a moment, then added, Cody might mention someone named Agnes. He tends to talk to himself or his imaginary friend when he's playing with his toys. Just so you know, it's normal for him. I assured her it wouldn't be a problem, though her comment piqued my curiosity. With a final wave, Mr. and Mrs. Parker headed out into the rainy evening, leaving Cody and me to our own devices. The rain pounded against the windows, creating a soothing backdrop as we settled into the living room. I found an old episode of a Wipeout show from the early 2000s on TV and let it play for some background noise. Cody spread his toys across the floor, fully immersed in his own little world. I watched him out of the corner of my eye as he played. He was murmuring softly, using different voices for his toys. Occasionally, I heard him mention the name Agnes. Is Agnes your friend? I asked casually. Cody looked up at me and nodded. She likes to play with my toys, he said matter-of-factly, then returned to his game. I smiled, charmed by his innocence. Imaginary friends were a common thing among kids, after all. I decided to order the pizza and joined him on the floor, helping to build a makeshift racetrack for his cars. We laughed and played, and for a while, everything was perfectly normal. As we played, one of Cody's toys, a small, cube-like gadget with a crank on the side, caught my attention. It was the kind of toy that simulated a moving racing background on a screen when you pulled the crank down. It seemed to require a bit of effort to operate, yet suddenly, the toy activated on its own. The crank moved down, and the racing background began to whir and spin. I frowned, picking up the toy. How did this happen, Cody? Without looking up, he said, Agnes is playing with it. A chill ran down my spine. It was the way he said it. So nonchalant, so convinced. I tried to shake off the unease, turning the toy off and setting it aside. As the evening wore on, the rain showed no signs of letting up. The pizza arrived, and we ate together at the kitchen table. Cody chattered away about school and his favorite cartoons, his earlier comment about Agnes fading from my mind. After dinner, we returned to the living room. The Wipeout show was still on, and Cody was back to playing with his toys. I settled on the couch, feeling the coziness of the room juxtaposed with the storm raging outside. Around 8 o'clock, I told Cody it was time for bed. He protested a bit, but eventually agreed. I tucked him into bed, read him a story, and sat with him until he fell asleep. The house was quiet, save for the steady drumming of rain on the roof. I decided to tidy up a bit before the Parkers returned. As I was washing up in the bathroom, I heard a knock at the door. Assuming it was Cody needing something, I called out, "Cody, is that you?" There was no answer. I opened the bathroom door and stepped into the hallway. It was dimly lit, with shadows cast by the flickering light bulb overhead. The hallway stretched out before me, with doors leading to various rooms. At the far end, one of the doors slowly creaked open. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I turned off the bathroom light and cautiously approached the open door. My heart pounded in my chest, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the door, I peeked inside, expecting to find Cody playing a prank. Instead, I saw him sitting on the bed in the far corner of the room, his wide eyes staring at me. "Cody, what are you doing in here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me and said, Agnes pushed open the door. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The room suddenly felt much colder, and the air seemed heavier. I quickly crossed the room, scooped Cody up, and carried him back to the living room. We sat on the couch together, me holding him close as we waited for his parents to return. I didn't mention any of the strange occurrences when Mr. and Mrs. Parker came home. I was too shaken, too unsure of what I had experienced. They thanked me and paid me, and I left as quickly as I could, the cold night air feeling oddly comforting after the unsettling events inside. A few weeks later, Mrs. Parker called to ask if I could babysit Cody again. I hesitated, the memories of that night flooding back. I made up an excuse and declined. I never returned to the Parker house after that. The experience stayed with me, lingering in the back of my mind. It wasn't just the strange events themselves, but the way Cody talked about Agnes as if she were a real person. It left me wondering about the boundaries between imagination and reality, and whether some things are just beyond our understanding. As I got older, I occasionally heard stories about other families experiencing similar things. Children with imaginary friends who seemed too real, too interactive. It made me think about Cody and wonder if Agnes was still a part of his life, or if she had faded away as he grew older. Every summer for 9 years, my friends and I would pack up our bags and head to St. Michael's Catholic Camp, nestled deep in the heart of the Midwest. This camp had been around since the 1930s, and it was steeped in a kind of timeless magic. Between the ages of 7 and 16, this place was my second home. For the most part, my summers were filled with typical camp activities: canoeing, archery, campfire stories, and hikes through the dense forest that seemed to stretch on forever. But it wasn't until my last year there, when I was a junior counselor, that something truly strange happened. Something that still sends chills down my spine whenever I think about it. That final summer was different. The recession had hit hard, and the number of campers dwindled. The once bustling cabins were eerily quiet, and the vibrant energy of the camp felt subdued. As junior counselors, we had more free time than usual. Our responsibilities included organizing activities, supervising younger campers, and, occasionally, cleaning the unused cabins to keep them from gathering dust. It was during one of these cleaning duties that I experienced something I can never forget. One hot July afternoon, another junior counselor, Mike, and I were assigned to clean 2 of the older cabins, Cabin 404 and Cabin 403. Cabin 404, in particular, had a reputation. It was one of the smallest and oldest cabins at the camp, around 80 years old, and there were always rumors floating around about it being haunted. I had never paid much attention to these stories, chalking them up to the vivid imaginations of young campers. But that day, something changed. Mike and I decided to split up to make the job go faster. He took cabin 403, and I headed for cabin 404. As soon as I stepped inside, I felt an inexplicable chill. It was the hottest day of the year, yet the cabin was freezing. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just the coolness of the old wood, or maybe a draft from the cracks in the walls. I grabbed a broom and started sweeping the dusty floor. 15 minutes in, I heard a rustling noise behind me. I froze, listening intently, but then brushed it off as just the wind or a small animal. But then, out of nowhere, the two screen doors on either side of the cabin flew open and slammed shut simultaneously. My heart pounded in my chest as I dropped the broom and bolted out of the cabin. Mike, who had been cleaning cabin 403, saw the whole thing and came running over. We decided we needed a break and took off for the mess hall to calm our nerves. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the camp settled into a quiet lull, I was asked to return the broom I had left in cabin 404. Brooms were a high commodity at camp, and we only had so many. Reluctantly, I agreed. One of my best friends at camp, Jenny, decided to come with me. I hadn't told her about the door slamming incident earlier because I knew it would spook her. We grabbed our flashlights and made our way back to the cabin. When we reached cabin 404, we turned on our flashlights and scanned the room for the broom. There it was, standing straight up on its bristles by itself. We exchanged nervous glances just as the broom suddenly fell to the ground. Jenny walked over to pick it up, assuming I had left it like that as a joke. Just as she grabbed it, one of the cabin 404 doors slammed shut again. We both screamed and ran out of there as fast as we could, our hearts racing. We spent the rest of the night trying to rationalize what had happened, but deep down, we knew it was something beyond our understanding. The next day, we told the camp director, Mr. Harris, about our experience. He listened patiently but assured us it was probably just the wind. Still, he agreed to check it out with us. When we returned to the cabin with Mr. Harris, everything seemed normal. There was no sign of anything unusual. Despite Mr. Harris's reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that something otherworldly had happened in cabin 404. Every time I walked past it for the rest of the summer, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I knew what I had seen and experienced, and I knew it wasn't just my imagination. As the summer drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on my time at St. Michael's Catholic Camp. I had always loved the campfires, the laughter, and the camaraderie, but that last summer had changed something in me. The experience in cabin 404 had opened my eyes to the possibility that there were things in this world beyond our comprehension. Years have passed since that final summer at camp, but the memories remain vivid. I often think about cabin 404 and what might have caused those strange occurrences. Was it really haunted? I may never know for sure, but one thing is certain. That summer taught me that the world is full of mysteries, and sometimes it's those mysteries that make life all the more intriguing. Reflecting on my experiences, I can't help but wonder about the history of cabin 404. The camp had been around since the 1930s, and I often thought about the countless campers and counselors who had passed through its doors. What stories could they tell? Had others experienced the same strange phenomena I had? One night, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to do some digging into the history of the camp. I reached out to some of the older camp staff and alumni, hoping to find someone who might know more about cabin 404. After a few days of searching, I managed to get in touch with Mr. Thompson, a former camp director who had worked at St. Michael's for over 30 years before retiring. Mr. Thompson was more than happy to share his memories of the camp. We met at a local diner, and over coffee, he began to recount the history of St. Michael's. He told me about the camp's founding, its growth over the decades, and the many changes it had undergone. When I asked him specifically about cabin 404, he paused for a moment, a thoughtful look on his face. "Cabin 404, huh?" he said, stirring his coffee. "That cabin has always been a bit of an enigma. There have been stories about it for as long as I can remember. Some say it's haunted. Others think it's just the wind and the old wood playing tricks on people. But there's one story that stands out." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper as if he were about to share a closely guarded secret. "Back in the late 1940s, there was a camper named Emily. She was a sweet girl, loved by everyone, but she had a fragile health. One summer, she fell seriously ill and was put in cabin 404 to be isolated from the other campers. Despite the best efforts of the camp staff and a local doctor, Emily didn't make it. She passed away in that very cabin." I listened intently, chills running down my spine. "Do you think her spirit is still there?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Thompson sighed. "I don't know. I'm not one to believe in ghosts, but I can't deny that strange things have happened in that cabin over the years. Doors slamming, cold spots, even sightings of a little girl in old-fashioned clothing. It's hard to say what's real and what's just the power of suggestion." As I left the diner that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to cabin 404 than met the eye. I knew that my experience wasn't unique, and that others had felt the same eerie presence I had. It made me feel a strange sense of connection to the past, to the generations of campers who had come before me. Camping in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan is an experience like no other. The untouched beauty of the landscape, the serene lakes, and the towering trees create an atmosphere that feels almost magical. It was late autumn, and the vibrant fall colors had given way to a carpet of dead leaves on the forest floor. My friend Jake and I had chosen a secluded spot, hoping for a quiet weekend away from the hustle and bustle of our daily lives. We arrived at our campsite late in the afternoon, the sun already dipping below the horizon and casting long shadows across the ground. The air was crisp and cool, with a slight bite that hinted at the coming winter. We set up our tent and built a small fire, the warmth and light a comforting contrast to the encroaching darkness. As night fell, the sounds of the forest came alive. The rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, and the occasional snap of a twig. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that seeps into your soul and makes you feel connected to the earth. After a simple dinner cooked over the campfire, we settled into our tent for the night. The tent was small but cozy, with our sleeping bags laid out side by side and our backpacks stashed at the foot. We talked for a while, sharing stories and jokes until sleepiness began to overtake us. Jake was the first to drift off, his steady breathing a soothing background noise as I lay there, staring up at the dark canvas of the tent. It must have been around midnight when I first heard the footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, a rhythmic crunching of leaves that seemed to circle our campsite. At first, I thought it was just an animal, a deer or maybe a raccoon, foraging in the night. But as the footsteps continued, I noticed that they never strayed far from our tent. They would approach, circle around, and then retreat slightly before starting the loop again. I nudged Jake awake, whispering, "Do you hear that?" He groaned softly, rubbing his eyes. "Hear what?" "Listen," I said, my voice barely audible. We both lay still, straining to hear. The footsteps continued, closer now, almost right outside our tent. Jake's eyes widened, and he mouthed, "What is that?" "I don't know," I whispered back, my heart beginning to race. We grabbed our flashlight and, with a silent agreement, decided to confront whatever was out there. Jake unzipped the tent flap slowly, the sound loud in the quiet night. He shone the flashlight into the darkness, sweeping it back and forth. The beam of light cut through the blackness, illuminating the trees and the ground covered in dead leaves. But there was nothing there. No animal, no person, not even a disturbance in the leaves. We waited a few moments, listening intently. The footsteps had stopped as soon as we opened the tent, and now there was only silence. After a few minutes, we retreated back into the tent, zipping it closed and turning off the flashlight. We lay there in the dark, hearts pounding, waiting. It didn't take long for the footsteps to start up again, this time even closer. They seemed to come from right beside the tent, the sound clear and distinct. Jake and I exchanged nervous glances, our previous bravado fading quickly. "What do we do?" Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. I thought for a moment. Let's just stay quiet and see if we can figure out what it is. We lay there, motionless, listening to the slow, methodical crunch of leaves. It was unnerving, the sound too deliberate to be an animal. My mind raced with possibilities. A lost hiker, a prankster, something more sinister. The not knowing was the worst part, the uncertainty gnawing at my nerves. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. The silence was almost deafening, the tension in the tent palpable. Then, faintly, I heard a humming sound. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew steadily louder. It was a melodic tune, eerie and unrecognizable, like a lullaby from another world. Jake and I exchanged wide-eyed glances, our fear mingling with curiosity. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. "I don't know," I replied, my voice shaking, "but we need to find out." I slowly unzipped a small section of the tent, just enough to peek out. The night was pitch black, the moon hidden behind a thick layer of clouds. I strained my eyes, trying to see anything in the darkness. And then I saw it, a soft, phosphorescent glow hovering a few feet from our tent. It was formless, a floating cloud of light that gently pulsated with an otherworldly rhythm. The footsteps and the humming seemed to emanate from this glowing entity. I blinked several times, not trusting my eyes. "Jake, look at this," I whispered, motioning for him to take a look. He peered through the opening, his eyes widening in disbelief. "What is that?" "I have no idea," I replied, "but we need to find out." We decided to follow the glow, curiosity now outweighing our fear. We slowly unzipped the tent, careful not to make any noise, and stepped out into the cold night. The glow drifted away from our campsite, moving towards the dense forest. We followed at a safe distance, our footsteps crunching softly on the dry leaves. The glowing entity led us deeper into the forest, weaving through the twisted trees and overgrown underbrush. The air grew colder, and the silence was punctuated only by the soft humming and the crunch of leaves under our feet. We kept our flashlight off, relying on the glow to guide us. After what felt like an eternity, we reached a small clearing bathed in moonlight. In the center stood an ancient-looking stone circle, moss-covered and time-worn. The glow settled in the center of the circle, illuminating a figure that had been standing there, cloaked in shadow. The figure was hooded and cloaked, its face obscured by darkness. It stood perfectly still, like a statue, the glow casting an eerie light around it. My heart raced as I tried to find words, but they escaped me. The figure began to move, its movements slow and deliberate. It raised an arm, pointing towards the edge of the clearing. I turned to see what it was pointing at and noticed another group of figures emerging from the trees. Their eyes glowed in the dim light, and they moved with a purpose, surrounding the stone circle. Jake and I found ourselves caught in the middle of a standoff between the hooded figure and the newcomers. We had no idea what was happening or what our role was in this strange gathering. Fear and confusion gripped us as we slowly backed away, our eyes darting between the two groups. As we edged back into the forest, the figures seemed to ignore us, their focus entirely on each other. We took this opportunity to turn and run, our feet pounding on the forest floor as we made our way back to our campsite. We didn't stop until we reached our tent, breathless and shaken. We quickly packed up our belongings, our hands trembling with adrenaline. The only thought in our minds was to get out of there as quickly as possible. We threw everything into our backpacks, barely taking the time to organize anything, and started the trek back to our car. The hike back felt longer than it had earlier, the forest now filled with shadows that seemed to reach out and grab at us. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made us jump, our nerves frayed and on edge. We kept looking over our shoulders, half expecting to see the glowing figure or the hooded man following us. When we finally reached our car, we threw our gear into the trunk and jumped in, locking the doors behind us. Jake started the engine, and we sped off, the tires kicking up gravel as we left the campsite far behind. We didn't stop driving until we were miles away, the adrenaline still coursing through our veins. We found a small diner that was open late and decided to stop for coffee, both of us needing something to calm our nerves. As we sat there, the events of the night replayed in our minds, the fear slowly giving way to a sense of disbelief. What the hell just happened? Jake asked, his hands shaking as he held his coffee cup. I don't know, I replied, my voice still trembling, but I don't think we should ever go back there. We agreed to keep the events of the night to ourselves, not wanting to be ridiculed or dismissed as crazy. But the memory of that night stayed with us, a haunting reminder of the mysteries that lurk in the dark corners of the world. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the glowing figure and the hooded man, their presence lingering in my mind. I found myself researching ancient stone circles and mysterious glowing entities, trying to make sense of what we had seen. But the more I read, the more questions I had, and the answers seemed to slip further away. I often wondered what would have happened if we had stayed in the clearing, if we had tried to communicate with the figures or understand their purpose. But the fear of the unknown had driven us away, and now we were left with only our imaginations to fill in the gaps. Years later, the memory of that night is still vivid. Jake and I have talked about it many times, each of us trying to piece together the puzzle of what happened. We've shared our story with a few close friends, but the reactions are always the same: skepticism and disbelief. But we know what we saw, and the fear we felt was real. It's a reminder that the world is full of mysteries, and sometimes those mysteries are best left unexplored. There are secrets hidden in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves, and not all of them are meant to be understood. So, if you ever find yourself camping in a secluded spot, far from the safety of the familiar, remember our story. Stay vigilant, trust your instincts, and be prepared for the unexpected. Because sometimes, the unknown is closer than you think, lurking just beyond the edge of the firelight, waiting to make itself known. I had always prided myself on being a rational, no-nonsense kind of person. Ghost stories were just that, stories. But the events that unfolded when I started my new job made me question everything I thought I knew about the world. It all started when my best friend, Kevin, helped me get a job at a large retail store. Kevin had been working there for about a year and had nothing but good things to say about it. especially the overnight shifts. He didn't give me much detail about what to expect, just that the job was easy and the pay was decent. I trusted him completely and was excited to start. The store was your typical big box retailer, with wide aisles, high shelves stacked with merchandise, and a distinct hum of fluorescent lights that seemed to buzz louder at night. It was located on the outskirts of our suburban town, far enough from the city to feel a bit isolated, but close enough to draw a steady stream of customers during the day. On my first night, Kevin and I arrived just before midnight. The parking lot was eerily empty, illuminated by a few flickering streetlights. We walked in through the employee entrance at the back, where the night shift crew was gathering for the nightly briefing. There were about 6 of us that night, all dressed in the store's uniform. A navy blue polo shirt and khaki pants. "All right, everyone," our shift supervisor, Karen, began. "We've got a truck delivery tonight, so let's get those pallets unloaded and the stock shelved. Brian, since you're new, I'm assigning you to aisles 8 and 9. They're pretty straightforward, so you should be fine. Kevin will be in aisle 10 if you need any help." I nodded, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. Kevin gave me a thumbs up and a reassuring smile as we headed into the store. The store at night was a completely different world. The absence of customers created an almost cathedral-like silence, broken only by the occasional clattering of a shopping cart or the beeping of the pallet jack. The aisles seemed longer, stretching into shadows that the overhead lights couldn't quite reach. There was something peaceful yet unsettling about it. As I started stocking the shelves in aisle 8, I quickly got into a rhythm. The repetitive task of unboxing items and placing them on the shelves was oddly calming. I was just beginning to feel comfortable in my new role when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. A black shadow or mass darted quickly across the end of the aisle. I paused, my heart racing a bit. It had moved towards a dead-end section where there shouldn't have been anyone. I brushed it off, thinking it must have been Kevin, since he was working in the adjacent aisle. I continued my work, but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. After a few minutes, curiosity got the better of me, and I walked over to aisle 10. There was Kevin, sitting on the floor, organizing items on the bottom shelves. "Hey, Kev, did you just walk by a few minutes ago?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He looked up, puzzled. "No, I've been here the whole time." "Why?" I hesitated, unsure if I should mention what I saw. I thought I saw something, or someone, a shadow or something, moving really fast down the aisle. Kevin's expression changed subtly, a knowing look crossing his face. "Yeah, I've seen those too. Didn't want to tell you and freak you out. Figured you'd experience it yourself sooner or later." He went on to explain that he frequently saw shadows out of the corner of his eye, but whenever he turned to look, they were gone. It was like a fleeting glimpse of something just beyond perception. Over the next few months, I settled into the routine of the overnight shift. On delivery nights, the store buzzed with activity as we worked together to unload and stock the new inventory. On other nights, there were fewer of us, and the silence could be almost oppressive. It was during these quieter nights that the strange occurrences seemed more frequent. One night, a new employee, Jessica, joined our team. She was assigned to work in aisle 14, at the very back of the store. During our break, she came over, looking visibly shaken. "I saw something weird earlier," she said, glancing nervously around the break room. "A shadow, like a person, but when I looked, there was no one there." Kevin and I exchanged glances. We had deliberately not mentioned the shadows to any new hires, not wanting to influence their experiences. It was unsettling to hear that Jessica had seen the same thing. The eerie incidents didn't stop at shadows. One morning, around 6 a.m., Kevin and I were finishing our duties, getting ready for the morning shift to take over. We were talking about the strange things we'd experienced, the shadows, the footsteps, the weird noises, when suddenly, a loud slap echoed through the store. A loaf of bread flew off the shelf a few feet from us. We both stared in shock, barely able to believe what we had just seen. We walked over, picked up the bread, and tried to recreate the incident. We banged on the side of the shelf, hit the bottom, but nothing caused the bread to fly off like that. Then I slapped my hand on a plastic bag, and it made the same sound we had heard. It was as if the bread had been smacked with force off the shelf. As we stood there, trying to make sense of it, the doorknob to the office behind us started rattling rapidly. It lasted only a few seconds before stopping abruptly, just as the front doors opened and the morning manager arrived. Another time, just before midnight, I was walking towards the restroom when I saw Laura, one of the cashiers, hurrying towards me. She looked pale and scared. "Did you knock on the bathroom door?" she asked urgently.
No, irraplia, confusa.
I was coming from the office. Why? I heard 3 loud bangs while I was in there, she said, her voice trembling, but there was no one else around. I assured her it wasn't me or anyone else from our team. She hurried past me, and I later found out from Kevin that she had asked to see the security footage. When they reviewed it, they saw her entering the bathroom, followed by a minute of static on the screen. When the footage resumed, she was seen hurrying out, just as she had described. One particularly creepy night, we were experiencing power issues, and the lights were dim throughout the store. The dim lighting made everything look sinister, especially the back aisles. I was assigned to aisle 16, which I dreaded because it always had a creepy vibe, even more so with the poor lighting. Around 2 a.m., Kevin came to get me for our lunch break. As we were talking and cleaning up, we heard a rattling noise from aisle 15, followed by a low growl. We both froze, our eyes wide with fear. We gasped, exchanged a horrified look, and ran towards the front of the store. We passed by another coworker, Mark, who asked what happened. When we told him, he revealed that earlier that night, while getting supplies in aisle 12, he felt like he had been pushed to the floor and heard a laugh. He hadn't told us because he thought we wouldn't believe him. The 3 of us went to the office to check the security cameras. What we saw sent chills down our spines. In the footage, we saw a shadowy mass crawling sideways along the shelves, like something out of a horror movie. We stayed together for the rest of the night, too scared to be alone. The most terrifying incident happened one night when we were in the basement, putting away stock. The basement was old, with creaky stairs and a damp, musty smell. The only light came from a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long, eerie shadows. As we were talking and laughing, trying to keep our spirits up, we suddenly heard heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. The sound was slow and deliberate, like someone wearing heavy boots. We all fell silent, staring at the staircase as the footsteps grew closer and closer, stopping just before the last step. We cautiously walked over and peeked around the corner. No one was there. We searched the entire basement but found nothing. We were the only ones in the store that night, and the doors were all locked. I don't work at that store anymore. From what I've heard, they eventually did away with the overnight shift entirely. No one wanted to work it. The strange, unexplained events became too much for everyone. Looking back, I still can't explain what happened during those nights. The rational part of me wants to believe there's a logical explanation for everything, but the experiences I had at that store have left me questioning what I thought I knew. Maybe some things are beyond our understanding, lingering in the shadows just out of sight, waiting to be discovered.